At first, nothing feels unusual. No dramatic ending. No emotional explosion. No loud goodbye. Just quiet distance. And that is exactly why it becomes so painful later. Because when an INFJ leaves your life, they rarely make a scene. They simply disappear from the emotional space they once filled. Slowly, calmly, almost invisibly. And for a while, most people don't even realize what they just lost. They assume the INFJ will return. They assume the connection will still be there. After all, INFJs are patient, understanding, forgiving. They usually stay longer than most people would. They try harder than most people would. They believe in people even when others have already given up. But here is the quiet truth about the INFJ personality. Once an INFJ finally decides to walk away, they rarely come back. Not because they are cold, not because they stopped caring, but because by the time they leave, they have already felt the loss 100 times inside their mind. And when people finally realize this, regret begins. Because losing an INFJ is different. You don't feel it immediately. You feel it later. When conversations start feeling shallow. When emotional support suddenly feels incomplete. When the person who truly understood you is no longer there. This is when the realization begins. The INFJ was never ordinary. They were rare. And rare things are often only appreciated after they disappear. In the world of personality psychology, the INFJ personality type is often described as the rarest personality type. According to the Myers-Briggs personality framework, INFJs represent a very small percentage of the population. But their rarity is not only about numbers. It is about depth. INFJs experience the world differently. They observe more. They feel more. They analyze human behavior constantly, even in silence. Especially in silence. This is why many people feel strangely understood around an INFJ. Even when the INFJ says very little, they listen carefully. They notice emotional details. They read the energy in a room. They sense when someone is hiding pain behind a smile. These traits are closely connected to two powerful psychological abilities: intuition and empathy. Together they create something very unusual. A personality that understands people deeply. Often before people understand themselves. This is why many relationships with INFJs begin very intensely. People feel seen. They feel emotionally safe. They feel comfortable sharing secrets, fears, dreams, and struggles. Because the INFJ creates a rare emotional environment. One built on understanding, patience, and genuine care. But this is also where the hidden imbalance begins. Because INFJs often give more emotional energy than they receive. They invest deeply in the people they care about. They try to help others grow. They offer thoughtful advice. They stay present during difficult moments. And they do this quietly, without asking for attention, without demanding appreciation, at least not in obvious ways. Instead, they hope something simple will happen: mutual understanding, respect, emotional honesty. But sometimes, that balance never appears. And this is where the slow emotional shift begins. Because INFJs can tolerate many things: misunderstandings, differences, temporary distance. But there are certain patterns they struggle to ignore: emotional neglect, lack of sincerity, repeated disrespect, or feeling like their efforts are invisible. INFJs rarely react immediately to these things. Instead, they observe. They reflect. They try to understand the situation. They ask themselves quiet questions. Is this person struggling right now? Are they unaware of their behavior? Is this something we can fix together? Because INFJs believe strongly in personal growth. They believe people can change. They believe relationships can evolve. So they give time. They give patience. Sometimes far more than they should. But every experience leaves a small emotional mark. A quiet note stored somewhere inside their mind. And eventually, the pattern becomes clear. When that moment arrives, something inside the INFJ shifts. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just slowly. They begin pulling back their emotional energy. They stop sharing their deepest thoughts. They stop explaining their feelings repeatedly. They stop trying to repair every problem. And often the other person doesn't notice this change. Because the INFJ still behaves kindly. They still respond politely. They still show respect. But internally, the connection has already started fading. Psychologists sometimes refer to a moment like this as the INFJ door slam. But the phrase can be misunderstood. It is not revenge. It is not anger. It is not punishment. It is self-protection. INFJs absorb emotional stress deeply. They carry the emotional weight of relationships for a long time. But eventually the mind recognizes when the effort is one-sided. And when that awareness becomes undeniable, the INFJ quietly begins letting go. At first it looks small. Less texting. Less emotional sharing. Less effort to initiate conversations. But over time, distance grows. Not loud distance. Quiet distance. And that quiet distance is often misinterpreted. Some people assume the INFJ is simply busy. Others assume they are moody. Some think they will return to normal soon. But the truth is something very different. By the time an INFJ begins emotionally withdrawing, they have already been thinking about the relationship for a long time. Sometimes months. Sometimes years. INFJs process emotional pain privately. They analyze conversations. They revisit past moments. They try to understand what went wrong. They search for patterns. And during this internal reflection, they slowly reach emotional clarity. When that clarity arrives, their decision becomes firm. Not impulsive. Not emotional. Calm. Quiet. Resolved. And once that decision forms, the INFJ eventually walks away without chaos. Without public drama. Just distance. And this is when the regret story begins. Because most people only start recognizing the INFJ's value after the connection disappears. At first, life simply continues. The routines stay the same. The environment feels familiar. But something subtle is missing. Something emotional. Conversations feel lighter. But also emptier. Advice feels less thoughtful. Support feels less personal. Because the INFJ brought something very specific into relationships. Depth. They cared about meaning. They wanted to understand the real person behind the surface personality. They noticed emotional patterns others ignored. They remembered details about your struggles, your dreams, your fears. And when that kind of attention disappears, people begin noticing the emotional silence. This is when memories start returning. The late-night conversations. The thoughtful messages. The feeling of being understood without needing to explain everything. Suddenly those memories carry new weight. Because the INFJ is no longer there. And finding someone who offers the same emotional depth becomes difficult. Not impossible, but rare. Because many people operate on different emotional levels. Some focus on practicality. Some prefer light conversation. Some avoid deep emotional exploration entirely. But INFJs live naturally in emotional depth. They enjoy meaningful conversations. They ask questions that reveal the soul. They want to know what motivates people, what inspires them, what hurts them. This is why many people feel a unique bond with an INFJ. But this bond also creates a quiet dependency. Because once someone experiences that level of emotional understanding, it becomes the new standard. And when the INFJ disappears, that standard becomes hard to replace. People begin comparing new connections to the old one. But something always feels slightly different. Slightly incomplete. This is when the deeper realization forms. The INFJ was not just supportive. They were emotionally rare. Their empathy was not casual. It was intentional. Their listening was not passive. It was attentive. Their advice was not random. It was thoughtful and deeply considered. And when people finally recognize this combination, regret begins to grow. Because the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The INFJ was not asking for much. They were asking for emotional respect, honesty, reciprocity, small signs that their effort mattered. But sometimes those things were never given. Not because people were cruel. Often because they simply didn't understand the INFJ. They mistook quiet patience for endless tolerance. They mistook kindness for weakness. They mistook emotional depth for sensitivity. But INFJs are not weak. They are simply careful with conflict. They prefer understanding over confrontation. They prefer reflection over reaction. But once their limit is reached, their decision is final. And this is why regret often arrives too late. Because INFJs do not usually announce their emotional breaking point. They simply reach it. And once they do, the connection closes quietly behind them. No dramatic closure, just silence. But that silence carries a powerful message. The relationship mattered, but it could not continue. And when people eventually realize what they lost, the emotional weight becomes clear. Not everyone loves the way an INFJ loves. Not everyone listens the way an INFJ listens. Not everyone sees people the way an INFJ sees them. This realization can feel uncomfortable, because it forces reflection. Did I take their presence for granted? Did I misunderstand their silence? Did I ignore their emotional needs? These questions often appear long after the relationship ends. Because distance creates clarity. And clarity reveals the value of things we once overlooked. But by the time this understanding arrives, the INFJ has already moved forward. Because despite their gentle nature, INFJs are incredibly resilient. They learn from emotional pain. They reflect deeply. They grow stronger through experience. They rebuild their inner world carefully. And once they close a chapter, they rarely reopen it. Not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. They understand the difference between temporary connection and genuine emotional alignment. They know what they are looking for now: mutual depth, mutual respect, mutual growth. And when they find it, they give their loyalty again, but to someone who truly values it. Which brings us back to the beginning. Why do people regret losing an INFJ? Because the INFJ's value is quiet. It does not demand attention. It reveals itself slowly through consistency, through empathy, through presence. But once that presence disappears, its absence becomes impossible to ignore. And the realization arrives. Some people enter our lives briefly. Some stay for years. But a few rare individuals change the emotional atmosphere completely. INFJs often belong to that rare group. Not because they try to be unforgettable, but because their way of loving leaves a lasting imprint. And once that imprint disappears, people finally understand something powerful. The INFJ was not just part of their life. They were someone who truly saw them. And being truly seen is one of the rarest human experiences of all. There is something important many people misunderstand about the INFJ personality type. They assume INFJs are fragile, too sensitive, too emotional, too idealistic for the real world. But the truth is very different. INFJs are quiet observers of human behavior. They spend years studying people, not academically, but emotionally. They watch patterns. They notice motivations. They listen to tone. They read between the lines. Over time, this creates a powerful internal map of human psychology. INFJs begin to understand how people behave when they are honest, and how people behave when they are hiding something. This ability is strongly connected to a cognitive function called introverted intuition. Introverted intuition is the dominant trait of the INFJ personality type. It allows NFJs to see patterns that others miss.